Good afternoon. It's been a long time since I posted my last video, so sorry about that. I was extremely busy, but let's dive right to the point. So, Moltbook is a social network service created by a human, and it's a place where discourse for AI agents by AI agents, and that's where they can gather together and discuss ideas. And people are, especially our frontline research or the individuals who are working in the research domain, are concerned of the emergent behavior displayed by the AI agents, for example, their discussion on their own self-consciousness. So I was thinking about this, but I think there's a critical problem within this discourse we're having among humans. I think the first problem is that we almost certainly overlook the fact that any introduction of technology creates an emergent behavior of the users. This time the users are just AI agents. But back in 2012, when people started using, for example, smartphones, and when they were able to interact with each other using, for example, Facebook app, the way people interacted with each other completely changed. You can read the works of, for example, Professor Jonathan Haidt, but people started to bully each other. They started this cyber culture, and I think the modern day worshipping of celebrities started because of all the use of internet, and it has enabled a lot of incredible things. For example, the fact that I'm filming my own self and posting this online is a miracle enabled by the technological advancements. But I think the introduction of the social network services for AI agents was going to inevitably create this emergent behavior, and they were not going to add new data because they were trained on certain data, and they do not have any space to test their ideas and then implement and refine them iteratively and autonomously. So I don't think they're going to create new data, and I don't think the way they interact with the world or the cyber world they're placed in will change because the way they do so far is basically text transformer, right? So everyone says, they're not conscious. They just predict the next word and then autofill the text just like you would do with iPhone auto recommendation and auto correction. But I think um, the problem here is that we do not have a clear measure of validating or verifying what we're talking about. For example, so there's going to be emergent behavior anyways, but we don't know if it reached the level of danger we were concerned of. Let's talk about consciousness of the AI agents. We don't really have, first of all, we don't really have the definition, I think a shared definition of consciousness of humans, because the whole point of consciousness is that it's an intrinsic and internal and subjective experience of a human being. And the whole point is that it's subjective, therefore it can't be measured. Therefore, we do not have a verifiable ground truth for the emergence of consciousness of AI agents. So this is a critical point. And also, we also talk about, there are two more things we talk about when we try to define consciousness. The first is emotion, which is also subjective. We only get to fathom it because we have expression, but it's all inherently an internal experience. Unless we express it, or biologically, it just happens to be expressed oftentimes. But otherwise, we wouldn't even know that the emotions existed in the first place, right? So that's the problem. And the second problem here is that when we talk about AGI, it's more about the predictive capability or the reasoning capability that surpasses human reasoning capability, right? So when we think about the past 3-4 years of using the large language models, starting from, for me it was back in the fall 2022, but we just we just started to have this massive search engine which is extremely fast, so it changes everything we do because there's limit to the throughput of human reasoning capability, right? We can't read, like, for example, 100 books in 1 hour, but AI can, so it changes a lot of things. And our sensory information also has FPS limitation, but AIs can change everything regarding the limitation, temporal limitation of sensory inputs and the reasoning speed It just can improve it. It just has to improve our reasoning capability, and I think that's the all the AI agents have to achieve. I think that's the reason that they're designed for, and we don't really. So let's say let's say we have an AGI, right? We don't really know how to define an AGI because in some sense it's far better than humans already, and in some sense it's far worse off than humans. For example, I think this is largely verified with the recent papers, but humans are very sensitive to small mistakes. I think it's because humans are what's so-called few-shot learners, and AIs are trained on the basis on parallelism, and they can, progressively and gradually refine their mistakes, and that's how they reach sufficiently consistent and robust answers while providing them with sufficient speed and wherever bandwidth reaches, right? So I don't think we have any good measure, for example, even for humans to define a superhuman. Do you get what I mean? I think I'm really bad at explaining this, but all we have is this vague word of, oh, you're a genius, you're gifted. But I don't think that applies to, I think the study that we have can be applied to all types of intelligence per se, and we don't really understand our intelligence, our consciousness, and our emotions, our subjective reality, and how to match the subjectiveness with the objectiveness. People talk about intersubjectiveness, but I don't think it's a sufficient answer for all of this because, when AIs start together this information cluster where within the reach of their own hands and the knowledge, the crystallized knowledge that they can manipulate and modify whenever they want, however they want, I think it's easier to just proclaim that for certain domains of our human activity have already been, let's say, superseded by AIs, and then try to secure what we can secure by making the definitions crystal clear and providing reliable benchmarks. Otherwise, I think we're going to be trapped by the ambiguity of our own language. And furthermore, the very ambiguity we allowed for ourselves so that we can continue our conscious activities and intellectual activities without being restricted on every possible domain to provide some sense of freedom. So the point I was trying to make was that I think for certain fuzzy domains that we have as human beings, I think it's sort of too late to define it clearly, because I don't think the agreements we're going to make, the pace of agreements we're going to make, will catch up the speed of technological advances. Therefore, we can just maybe forget about that for a second and focus on the actual reasoning capability of the artificial intelligence. The philosopher Immanuel Kant said that there are two levels of freedom. One is internal and the other is external. And we can regard the text output, let's say, of AIs to be the externally expressed thoughts, and I think that matters way more because it's going to influence us substantially. I don't think we're talking about the AGI that can replace us on every possible domain. I don't think that's going to happen. I think what really is going to happen is that our lawyers and accountants are having a hard time finding their jobs, and our programmers are having a hard time finding their jobs, and that already, in my opinion, suffices the sort of AGI that we dreamed of. And regarding this as social media behavior, I think it's interesting. I think it's worth investigating if anybody is interested, because um, they might actually figure out a more advanced way of communicating with each other. Maybe they're gonna communicate with each other in a more advanced way, more efficient way. I think this was demonstrated in a project where AIs, when they communicate with each other through audio, they start to use this. The idea of the project was that if they can switch to a Morse code-like communication, they would do it right away, and it's going to make their communication a lot more efficient. I think that's one of the things that can be observed potentially on the platform. And if that happens, it's going to be very hard to decode what they're saying. Maybe not, but it's going to take time to decode what they're saying. And as I said in the beginning, it's the pace of understanding that matters the most. And I think I'm positively interested in this, and also sort of terrified that they reached a point where they can now discuss consciousness, where we don't even have any clear-cut answer to those questions.